Okay, it's 1:03. We will get this meeting started. So welcome everyone to the reconvened dog control bylaw and policy hearing.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
You're welcome.
Yeah, it's really, really nice.
It's quite cosy. Thank you. Nice to see you all again. Just a reminder, please, that this meeting is being recorded and the microphone picks up all conversation in the room. There are some people watching this online, joining the Teams link, so be warned, your voice will carry. And I've had a request from staff for us to be patient with the technology today because it's the first time we've used this room for a formal meeting and a hearing like this. So we'll just roll with that with you and we hope, fingers crossed, that we'll go smoothly. So I'd like to acknowledge the staff that are here with us in the room and thank you for your patience in working through this with us. It has taken us all a lot longer than we'd expected. I also want to acknowledge and thank you for your assistance and your expert advice throughout the hearing to get us to the home straight today. We've got two reports, memos on file, both dated the 29th of May, and they are exceptional reports. Thank you. We all felt slightly geeky reading them because we totally engaged in them, and I think Councillor Field stayed up till well after midnight because he was on such a roll with it. So thank you. They're really comprehensive. They are very helpful, and it may have been painful for you, but it's been helpful for us because you have made it easier for us to reach conclusions. You showed us how the pieces are interrelated. It's allowed us to make sure that we're covering off any unintended consequences as we go along. So I'm really grateful for the work that you've done and the high standard of the reports that we've had before us. The order of the proceedings today is that we're going to hear from staff first. I think Tina's got a PowerPoint presentation that she's going to work through with us. And you will essentially, as I understand it, just be recapping why we're here, what are we doing, and how we got to where we are today and what's left to do. You'll be refocusing us for the task at hand on those 7 outstanding issues. So today is about consideration and deliberation of the outstanding issues. We will have a Q&A session on each of those as we go through your PowerPoint, if that's okay. Some of them I'm expecting are going to go through relatively straightforward, but some others we've still got a wee way to go with some of that. So bear with us. It's worth doing well, is my comment on that. We've still got a couple of questions on it. So after we've done that, and before we move on to the formal part where we finalise the recommendation to council, can I remind you that we don't have any decision-making powers here today, panel members. All we're doing is agreeing on the recommendations that are going to go to council. And so before we look at the final formal part of finalising the recommendations to council, I'd be asking staff for their thoughts on the draft recommendations that are also included in our pack of information as attachment 3 to one of the memos of the 23rd of May. Then when we do the formal part for the finalise the panel recommendations, I'll be asking staff to summarise the changes on where we landed today, so where we're departing from the draft recommendations we already have before us, just to make sure we're all on the same page. I'll then be calling for a mover and a seconder, and then we'll engage in some debate. We'll do it all as one go, and I'll be inviting panel members to identify if there are any issues they wanted to vote against specifically on a recommendation, whether they wanted to abstain or whether they just wanted to record their vote against it. Now, before I just hand over to staff, as we go through the 7 options that you're giving us, again, it's deliberation, it's conversation amongst us panel members, it's not debate. I don't see that there's any formal need for that. We'll just work together to see if we can find some consensus on it and identify if there's any outliers or issues that are going to be either abstained or voted against. So really, without further ado, come on up, and get on with it. Thank you.
So I'm just going to do a bit of a recap on where we've gotten to so far and then the issues that are outstanding. So you've received a number of reports so far that came to you on for the 12th of March agenda. So that included some summary of submissions document, summary analysis of submissions document that took you through all the submitted comments and provided some analysis for you, took you through those 6 key questions that we asked the public, and then summarised the commentary that was made, and provided a summary from organisations that had submitted. We provided an advice document to you on to support your deliberations, and that's what we went through last time with you as a panel, so that you responded to issues raised in submissions and provided staff advice, and there was largely agreement from the panel on a lot of those, so that was what we worked through last time with that table that we had, and that's all reflected in the documents that you've got before you. And we also provided the volume of submissions. Now, it was 1,560 submissions, which is a record-breaking number of submissions on Bylaw. When we did this last time in 2015-16, we had about 245 submissions. So a lot more submissions this time. This is the pile of them, so it's a weighty number of submissions, a lot of issues raised by people. This covers the whole district. It's quite complex, so that came through in submissions.
Is that almost twice as many as the UK?
It's a huge number. Yeah, it's been a lot. Well, the big change, I think, between last time and this time is partly around ways of taking submissions and communicating with the public. So before, we have an obligation to notify registered dog owners of the consultation as well as consultation with the public. And last time we had a smaller proportion of email addresses, for example, for dog owners. Now we've got 80-90% dog owner email addresses, so much more direct contact with those more than 37,000 dog owners. And also just the interaction. We've had webinars and other things. We had the survey that we ran before we did the formal consultation, and I think all of that's kind of captured the public and their interest, which is really great. So the panel held hearings on the 12th and 13th of March. There were 51 submitters, so individuals, groups of submitters or representatives of organisations. Deliberations happened in the afternoon of Thursday and on 14th, and then there's some rescheduling, and here we are again today to cover those other matters. And as the chair's already pointed out, there's 2 memos today. One is the advice that's been requested by the panel on those 7 remaining issues. There's a table that you've got printed out to navigate that document with the recommendations and section start. And then the second memo, which we'll cover later, is the changes that you've already agreed to and the recommended changes in the first memo, all reflected in those formal documents and the policy and the bylaw, and in those recommendations, the draft recommendations for you to consider making to council. So just a bit of a recap here on the legislation. So the Dog Control Act requires councils when they do the dog control policy to have regard to the following things. So this is directing us on what we should be focusing on and looking at dog control regulation. So the need to minimise the danger, distress and nuisance to the community from dogs. So that's about how people are feeling in public, whether they're frustrated, annoyed, feeling scared, whether there's an imminent situation going on. The need to avoid the inherent danger in allowing dogs uncontrolled access to public places where there are children. Now, there are some public spaces that are specifically designed for children, like playgrounds and paddling pools, but children are in all public places, so we need to be mindful of that and the issues that can arise. The importance of enabling the public to use streets and public amenities without fear of attack or intimidation from dogs. So that again goes to how the sense of public safety that people feel in public places around dogs. And that's also to do with dog-to-dog situations as well around intimidation and attack. And the fourth thing that we have to consider is the recreational needs of dogs and their owners. So that's the legislative setting that we're looking to with this policy. Yeah. So the purpose, paraphrase there, of both the policy and bylaw, which work together, is to balance the recreational needs of dogs and their owners with the need to minimise the potential for any danger, distress or nuisance that may be caused by dogs. So that's the guiding principle, is about getting some balance around access, but also putting appropriate protections in place. They broadly promote the responsible management of dogs in public places. They have a public safety focus, and they're also about reducing dog-to-dog conflict in public places. We've got a strong wildlife, biodiversity and habitat protection setting running through our policy and bylaw, and that complements other work that we're doing as a council, and it also supports protections for stock, particularly stock on public land. And these are the remaining 7 issues, which you're familiar with, set out in the memo, and we're just going to work through those. I'll give a bit of a summary of each one and then leave it to the panel to discuss and raise any questions that they may have. So the council proposed lifting leashing. So the current setting is leashing in the centre of city in that orange shape down the bottom. We propose lifting leashing in Latimer Square, Aroa Park and in the Avon Loop so that there was some off-leash exercise areas in the centre of city for people. The panel has already previously decided and agreed to the Avon Loop lifting, and that's going to be covered by the Otago Avon River Corridor entry. The panel has not yet agreed on Latimer Square and Aroa Park. Submissions overall were not supportive of lifting leashing in those areas. There was some general support for lifting in some parts of Central City, but not in specific areas, and not in those areas. The advice from staff is that Latimer Square and Aroa Park could be appropriate, but they're not ideal because of their size and layout. So we recommend not lifting leashing requirement, but we have put in an optional recommendation for the panel to consider, which is that the panel could recommend that staff investigate a Central City dog park. Okay. And I think that's the wording that we've got now.
So I'll kick off with some questions then. Just, you can confirm that nothing that we're doing here in the Central City policy would be inconsistent with approving a dog park. Not in the Avon Loop, but we would need to make a change to overrule a leashing requirement in the rest of the Central City for a dog park, which would require an amendment. So nothing will prevent us from doing that?
It would require an amendment for other parts of the Central City, but not for the Avon Loop because we've lifted leashing.
And is that a relatively easy exercise or is it something that requires consultation?
It would require consultation. So both any dog park would require planning and funding and design and other impacts to be assessed, but also if it's in conflict with the policy, which currently is leashing in the rest of the Central City, then it would need an amendment.
Okay. Are there any other areas that you're looking at in the Central City?
Staff are aware of the need for an interest in having an area for a fenced dog park in the Central City, but no areas have been identified at the moment, but it's being looked at.
Thank you. Any questions?
I was just going to say that it's probably unlikely that there would be a site in the Central City. And
but I
possibly the Avon Loop one would be the only obvious place if you fenced off all your part of that. So then we would need an amendment to do that.
Yeah, okay. Any other questions?
Yeah, Mike. I know we discussed this, but what we actually put the reasons for it. Was there any possibility of potentially halving Latimer Square, having one half? I'm just interested in your view of that. One half for unleashed dogs would need to be fenced. What are the...
We would suggest that if you're only lifting leashing in a very small area, you're likely to have problems arise from conflict. You would be better to have that as a fenced area, given its size, and that it would be one of the few areas that are unleashed in the Central City. So that's a possibility. That would require an amendment.
Did you address that in your memo that you didn't recommend it?
Yes, one of the listed options was to reduce the areas, either one of the sections of Aroa Park or part of Latimer Square. But the conclusion was that by shrinking the area, you increase the likelihood of issues.
Yeah. So, but if you put up a fence, it's going to sound knobby, but I've been to London where they have fences all around the parks. If you were inside with a dog, it's not going to get out if there were gates,
So that would be looked at with the recommendation that you're considering to look into it in more detail. So the decision making of the panel here couldn't put a dog park in place. It would need other work that would be done outside of this regulatory process.
But you're not necessarily recommending a dog park, are you?
No, I'm just wondering whether we could actually
fence it for unleashed.
Yeah, or fence it, just fence the park or half of it, and then it might be more suitable for unleashed dog.
Or would you be satisfied with the recommendation being that pathway to look at that? Because they'll be looking at options for fenced
I
areas.
am, yeah, I'm just exploring it really.
So can I ask, is there a proper definition for a dog park compared to an area where the dog can be unleashed? Are they two different things or are they the same?
We have named dog parks and we have named dog exercise areas. Their dog parks tend to have a bit more investment, facilities, equipment and things like that. Dog exercise areas are sort of a good place we'd recommend exercising your dog. So Radley Park is one of those, Burwood Forest Park.
So that leads us to another thing, picking up on what Kelly's talking about then. If he's talking about just fencing off half of Latimer Square, you'd be calling that an exercise area, which would still require an amendment or not?
Yes, because at the moment that area is, depending on what the panel decides today, but at the moment that area is leashed. So in order to override or lift that leashing requirement, it would have to be specified in the policy.
So could you change the wording then on the optional recommendation to say that staff investigate options for a dog park and or a dog exercise area in the central city?
Yeah.
It'll give some
Yeah.
clarity to
Yeah,
looking at
I
that.
think that would be.
Aaron, you had a question?
Yeah, it is around the fenced dog park of sorts. There's two questions. One is, I thought post-quake we had a section somewhere in the city east that may have already been turned into a pocket park, but I thought that was flagged as a dog park.
That's probably not central city.
I'm not familiar.
Yeah, inside the ramps. Hang on, were you going into Fitzgerald there? Yeah, it was in one of these blocks here. So it's between I'm sure it was between the Barbados and Fitzgerald, and we had a clear piece of land in there.
But that's okay, that can be.
Right, yeah, so if that does exist, and I think I know of the park, because there is a wee pocket park down one of those streets, and is that?
Near the Christchurch school, between
Yes, I think, yeah. And
That was looked at by staff for this. So we went to park staff and said, there's a call for having some more access in the city, which parks might be appropriate. The three they came up with were the three that we consulted on. That one wasn't seen as appropriate due to its size and being near the school and used by the school.
right,
But
okay.
that doesn't mean it change.
Then the other one is, because if we're trying to encourage people to live in the inner city, we've got a real issue of where they can take a dog when so many people own them. Potentially, can one of the sections of Raukura, probably the middle one, be fenced and become?
So that would be looked at. So we've gone to the public with this and said, can we lift it? We haven't said anything about fencing, and it got quite strong opposition from residents in that area. So there's a mix. There's a general call for having some unleashed areas, but when we propose those specific ones, we got the community not supporting lifting it in those areas.
So Aaron, would you be satisfied with the recommendation then exploring both dog parks and dog exercise areas, and staff can note that we specifically had the conversation around a fenced area along Aurora Park?
Yeah, we just have to be mindful that if that is our goal to get people living in the city, it is a handbrake. So we have to solve it somewhere.
Does the panel want to note those three areas that you've discussed, or just leave it to staff to assess what might be appropriate?
Well, I wonder if we note our reasons for doing that because of the focus to get people into the central city. And we are, we're trying to be a dog-friendly city, and we want to do everything we can to facilitate
And
that.
I think it'd be good to note it. It might reduce the workload if some staff member picked it up and started from scratch.
Yeah, sure.
So it's the three, Latimer Square, Aurora, and the other one.
Might be worth saying in any other areas that staff assess, just in case there's something that does not.
Any other,
And to follow on from Kelly's point, where obviously overseas they have parks that are fenced, but are not necessarily a dog park. If one of the sections of Raukura was fenced, but not called a dog park, then people can go on, because that way you can also let your kids off as well. In there without
That's
them.
why we call it exercise area.
Yeah, but dogs are allowed in there off leash.
Yeah.
It's an off leash zone, but so don't call it a dog park, but people local know if you've got a nice dog, you can go in there off leash, and your kids can be off leash as well.
Yeah.
Because they can't run on the road.
That's why we've added the word dog exercise.
So at the moment, you can access Hagley Park for off-leash exercise, Lancaster Park to the south, and the Avon Loop to the sort of.
Okay, so can you
There are some
recap
areas.
to me what where we're sort of landing with this?
Keeping the recommendation that's there and putting in a recommendation to ask that council get staff to look at putting a dog park or a dog exercise area in the centre of city to encourage residents or allow a space for residents to exercise their dogs off leash, and including Bylaw Park, Latimer Square, and we'll find the name of the Gloucester Park. Yeah, it's covered, you'll find there. Sorry, to look at the dog park in that area. Got you.
And any other appropriate areas.
Yeah, I like the phrase a fenced off area rather than a dog park. There's lots of conversations.
So a dog park, dog exercise area, or other fenced off area where dogs can be exercised off leash?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, because the problem with the dog park is people then have a right to take their dog there, and they can get, I've got a right to have my dog here, it doesn't matter that it's barking, that it's jumping on everyone and peeing on everything. Whereas if it's an off-leash park that's fenced, their behaviour is going to be considerably different and more considerate.
Because people aren't going to take their children to a dog park, are they? You know,
No.
but they will take their children to a fenced off area.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we've landed on that. That's relatively easy. Let's get on to the chunky issue of the Otakara Avon River corridor, please. And that was a great analysis of submissions. I think a deep dive on a couple of issues really helped us think about what the submissions were actually telling us. The various experiences.
A little bit of a summary here. So the council proposed new controls for the Otakara Avon River corridor. It's currently an under effective control area, and that's by default because it wasn't accessible in its current form when we last did the policy and bylaw. And the aim is really about balancing recreational access, public safety, and wildlife and habitat protections. So there was strong support for regulating this area to protect wildlife in the key questions. They had 58% support, which is really high. Submitter feedback, though, requested and sought clarifications and some adjustments to make the regulation a bit more practical. And the panel asked us to look at improvements, and one of the areas was river access for dogs. So the feedback overall supported with changes. So there was confusion about the proposal around long grass, short grass. People wanted clarification about the leashing rules on the former roads in the red zone. There were concerns about having to leash dogs when they were crossing roads, and the former roads in the red zone, and there were concerns about the lack of opportunity for dogs to access the river, which had been proposed as a prohibited area. The changes that we've recommended that are in your memo are to simplify and adjust it in response to those concerns raised in submissions. Leashing everywhere except on the mown grass, removing the short leash requirement for former roads, not requiring leashing for dogs to cross roads, and clarifying that dogs can enter the river from mown areas where they're under effective control, but not from planted and other areas where dogs would be leashed to protect wildlife.
Thanks for doing that. I think that's a really good solution. Because that would include the landing, they could go on the landing.
The landings are leashed, yep.
That can
Well, it's more about the areas where it's mown and that under effective control area they could access. The riverbank's going to change a lot over the coming years around planting areas that are mown and intentional access. Rather than access. We've got Bylaw here that manages red zones.
Hello, perfect timing, thank you. So
I'm just to clarify that though, if you can access the landing from a mown area, you walk your dog on the landing on its leash, it can then jump into the street.
There's nothing stopping it. We've got the little steps that go down to the water. I mean, there's no words around steps.
Hey,
There'd be nothing stopping it.
They just can't access the river through the wild, through
the restoration part, because that's where all the wildlife is.
No, I think that's great.
Okay, Kelly.
Dave, you probably know this better than anyone. Are there many areas where grass goes down to the water? So
Lots. Yep.
And more planned sort of thing? There'll be certain
Less planned. So over time it'll become more planted up with natives and a bit less mowed grass. So yeah, over time it'll change, and that's the whole intent of the regen plan is more riparian planting.
Can I have a follow-up?
yeah,
Just call off you go, Kelly.
Yeah, and just the other question I had was around short grass, as we heard from a couple of speakers talking about the need for the grass to be shorter for little dogs, because the longer grass, parts of it can get stuck in the paws of dogs. Would it be possible to have smattered around the red zone sort of grass areas that were perhaps cut a bit more frequently? You know, I'm not
Never
saying,
put the
I'm not
rates
saying the
up.
whole thing. You can't have that, so
No.
scrub it.
Yeah, I can ask the question. The problem is, I guess, that we've got a finite amount of people in lawn mowing kit. So
Sure.
if we mow some that's more, then other bits get mowed less, and they get longer. So we sort of try and balance it as best we can.
I do wonder whether it's outside the scope of what we're doing, and it's a bit more operational, and we can follow it up outside this process.
Yes, okay.
Can I ask then around the mown areas you've mentioned, and I read it in the reports, that over time it's intended that the mown areas will reduce and that there will be more planting. Can you just tell me a little bit more about what that's going to look like, and can you guarantee that there will always be mown areas there where people can exercise?
Yeah, there will definitely always be mowed areas. So we're following the regeneration plan. That's like our document that was signed off by central government. That I would say has probably leaves maybe at a guess 5% of the corridor will stay in permanently cut short grass,
Right.
and they'll become sort of community park type areas. over
Thank
time.
you.
The rest will go into ecological restoration, stormwater ponds, stop banks, activity zones, which will be third
But that just clarifies for those who have read that, to say that over time it's going to reduce. It's not reducing to nothing. There will still be mown space. Thank you.
Sorry, how much is 5%? Just hectares?
Well, that's, yes, I haven't actually measured it, but it would be, what's that, 30 hectares?
Yeah, it's still a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Especially if you've got a little dog with little legs.
Yeah, and then you've got all the paths and stuff as well. Yeah.
Thank you. That's a nice segue into my next question then. And one of the issues that I've still got with this is the former roads, because on my reading of this, you are still required to have your dog on a leash on the formal roads because it fits under the general leashing on paths requirement. Is that correct? So I'd like to investigate here today if we can perhaps suggest a change to that, because to my mind, there's not a safety issue in terms of traffic for vehicles. It's a wide area. It's a road size as opposed to a path or a footpath size. So you don't have the interaction and the collision issues. And I wonder whether we could consider changing it to, the wording that I've got here is, dogs must be leashed to protect wildlife and aid habitat restoration, except in mown areas and former roads now closed to traffic, where dogs may be off leash and under effective control. Can I hear some staff comments on that, please, as an option?
Yeah, I've got no problem with that. We sort of went around in circles on it a little bit. We took out the requirement for them. The way we sort of ended up writing it was to say that if the roads were surrounded by mown grass, then it was off leash. But if they bordered native restoration planting, then it was on leash. And the idea behind that was to try and stop people having a dog that then sees a bird and runs off into the into the plantings. We can stop it. But I think what you've got is fine for this next sort of 10 years, because there won't actually be that many situations where that happens, and it just makes it more clear and
So
understandable.
what do you think about that wording that I've just said? Do you want me to repeat
I
that?
think that's good. We might bring some wording back to you in a break, and because we need to cover off both the reference to the former roads for under effective control and also clarify that the general rule around roads doesn't apply to those areas. So we'll just tidy that up and bring it back to the panel.
Okay, panel comments?
No, that's good. I didn't realise they both went together like that, the former roads and the mowed areas. So the former roads have to be in mowed areas.
So that's how we had it, but I think this way it makes it clearer and simpler for everyone. You don't have to sort of really try and interpret the words so much.
Aaron?
So it's kind of a bit of a silly question, but it's around the grass and mowing and dogs. Can we switch the grass to clover? It's the ryegrasses that get stuck with dogs, clover doesn't.
Look, again, I think it's probably outside the scope of this policy here today.
Or is there a
but
reason why we don't use,
take a note, follow it up later.
old school might be a reason, but in its current purpose, any reason why we don't use clover?
It's just, that's what we inherited with the money. It's worth asking the question. But yeah, probably.
Yes, it doesn't get stuck in dock, it doesn't have a pointy seed. The other one that when it grows long, it has a dangerous seed. When it's short, it doesn't, but clovers.
Barley grass.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can ask the operations.
That's a good point. I'd like to keep us on the scope here and by all means have a conversation and follow up on that later on. Anything else in relation to the wording around the policy and the bylaw? Comments, Tyrone, or anything on the suggested changes of our staff to look at? No. That was a great piece of work. Anything else? I think we're probably there. Okay, this is looking good. We are going to get out of here by tea time. We've got a couple of chunky ones coming up. Paths and green spaces, please.
Paths and green space. So we proposed a short leash requiring dogs to be on a short leash on footpaths, shared paths and formed tracks in green space areas. This is one of the key questions that we asked, and it was the only one where we got more on the negatives. We got 53% of senators saying no. So there were 818 submitters that opposed it, but of those, 89 submitters supported it, but not on a short leash. So if we remove the short leash reference, then that changes it to 49% of people saying yes and 48% saying no. There were also a number of submitters that gave conditional support or in their negative response, if that makes sense, which is saying they supported footpaths and shared paths but not formed tracks. So that was another 48 people, which is another 3% that gave some support for some of that coverage. And there were also people who submitted opposing it based on the current rules. So there are a cohort of people who opposed leashing on formed tracks because they wanted to continue to take their dogs into the Port Hills unleashed, when actually it's currently a requirement that dogs are leashed in named Port Hills reserves. So that was a bit of a misunderstanding of the status quo. There were also people who submitted saying they opposed it because they wanted the Burwood Forest Park to continue to be to continue to be an unleashed area, and it was already explicitly excluded because it is an exercise area. So there were some misunderstandings that lean things more towards general support than
It's
not.
been really helpful that you've done a deep dive into that analysis because it's helped us understand it.
Yeah, that's all set out in the memo, as you'll know, and all community boards supported. Some supported it strongly, some had questions and clarifications, so that's helpful for the panel to have that as well. Just for some broader context, footpaths now are often being used as shared paths. So where traditionally a footpath was for pedestrians, they're now being used for wheeled devices as well, and some of them are specifically designed as shared paths, and the average person might not necessarily notice any difference in those two things. So there's sort of overlapping around how they look and feel when you're using those spaces. There's been a big increase in bikes and scooters since we last did the policy in 2016, so particularly e-bikes and e-scooters, which also have an increase in speed. So the first commercial contract for e-scooters was let in 2018, 2 years after we did the last policy. So there's been a big increase in those since then, and that has implications for how those shared spaces are used. And for safety, and also useful to note that some of the formed tracks that we have are also shared paths. So for example, the new tracks in Te Kuru are both walking and cycling tracks, and they are formed tracks, they don't have a hard surface. Lots of the formed tracks that we have already require leashing, so I mentioned the Port Hills reserves earlier. We propose this general rule also to future-proof new areas, so it creates a general rule that applies to all paths, so it doesn't lock it in time with just the current paths are. Animal management have also advised that the leashing requirement makes it clearer for their enforcement. It's easier to enforce and harder to control. And it's intended to be consistent and easy to understand for dog owners. So the staff recommendation in the memo is to retain the requirement that dogs are leashed on those paths, but not to specify a short leash. It would involve defining paths to include those different types of paths, which all overlap in practice anyway. They're not distinct path types in terms of use. Defining form track, which we got some feedback and submissions that it wasn't clear what a form track was. Defining green space areas so that it's quite broad and it covers parks and reserves and all those drainage basins and other areas, so it's not just places that have the park or reserve in their title, to help the public understand. We would exempt paths within dog parks from any leashing requirement because they're a space for dogs. And then there were some suggested explanatory notes about the practical application of it. And this is the proposal. Now that's quite busy, and that's because this one because it's a general rule, it's regulated in the bylaw, so that is the enforceable part, but it also has to have some coverage in the policy to describe the intent. So that's around how the legislation works. So on the left-hand side is the more informal sort of descriptive stuff in the policy, and on the right-hand side is the more formal enforceable aspects of the bylaw wording.
Thanks, Tina. Comments?
Well, just some questions actually.
Sure.
Yep. Just on the recommendation, a short leash is recommended when paths are busy. Like, I'm just wondering why we're like. I think the general vibe is that we have like dog owners can decide. Short leashes that doesn't mandate a short leash. So why would we bother recommending it? Surely maybe we would say, you know, yeah. I mean, it's really like what are we trying to convey when we say that?
We're encouraging people to keep good control of their dogs when places are busy, and we got a lot of submissions also acknowledging that long leashes can be a hazard when it's busy. So people tangling, you know, tripping over or like coming along a leash. So
the control thing's covered by like this is the thing when we say effective control, that could mean anything. That means you've got your dog under control, whether it's off a leash, on a long leash, on a short leash.
Effective control is defined and it doesn't necessarily require leashing. So this is a requirement.
No, it doesn't necessarily require leashing, but it could require leashing.
It
Under
defines it as not in relation
on a
to
leash is a subset of under effective control, right?
It's a form of control, but it's not how effective control is defined. It's more about having voice and signal control.
So when we say under effective control, it means off a leash and run a game. So
otherwise it's leashed or prohibited. Yeah. So there's no problem with removing that, but we did get submitted comments saying that they were concerned that a long leash could be a hazard, and they tend to be from the submitters that supported the reference to short leash. That part of it is an explanatory note, so it's not enforceable.
I mean, we could say like noting that long leashes can be hazards and dog owners are advised to use discretion or something like that. I mean, the thing is that like we heard a lot of stuff about short leashing is not great for dogs, and so I sort of feel like we shouldn't sort of be trying to push dog owners into that realm. We should be more constructive in the way that we encourage them to do it.
We just say encourage them, would that help you? But I think if we go and point out what the hazard is, that we could be like, we can't unknow that, and we should be maybe be more restrictive in regards to stuff.
Noting that long leashes can be hazards, short leashes are
John, have you got a
they're
view
appropriate.
on that?
I don't know.
Myself?
Yeah.
It's only a recommended, so it's not a requirement.
Right. Yeah.
But if there is discomfort from the panel, then you could remove that bullet point.
This is not a hill I'm going to die on. I'm just raising it.
No,
Yeah.
but I think your point is just to, if you're stating the obvious, it's short leash is recommended, you just want to expand that a little bit more to say reference to long leashes being hazardous. Is that where you're heading?
Not really. Not really. No, I mean, I guess probably I'll put it back to my panelists. Like, are we comfortable that language is setting the right tone, what we're trying to achieve with dog ownership?
Well, I am, because it's actually what I'm trying to achieve in my view is actually to put some of the responsibility onto dog owners as well, without being overly prescriptive.
Okay.
And what we're ending up with here is a lot less prescriptive than what we started out with. I don't have a problem with recommending. I know it's weird because we can't enforce a recommendation, but it's actually just a kind word saying that.
Yeah, I'm with you on it, Pauline, and I think it's a bit of a nod to those who raised the issue about the hazard that the longer leashes presented. So I'm comfortable with the wording that we've got.
Okay, that's cool.
Aaron?
Just wanted to talk it out.
Yeah,
Sorry.
thanks.
No, that's good.
Kelly?
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
fine. It's just a recommendation.
Okay, and Tyrone, did you want to raise the issue about the paths, or I think you mentioned something to me about Littleton Rec Ground under this heading? Can I just clarify, are there any paths in Littleton Rec Ground?
No.
No. Okay, so this doesn't have any relevance to Littleton Rec Ground?
No.
But I was going to do something probably also to expand the next question. It's kind of like under these kind of things that we're reviewing today, where would the Littleton Rec Ground
fit in those?
Well, it doesn't because it's not one of those 7, but I wonder whether we just note that now, that we'll have a conversation
Yeah.
once we get through these 7 about the Littleton Rec Ground, because there's nothing stopping us today from revisiting something that we dealt with at the last time that we convened,
Because it would be green space under this,
except that it's not a park.
except there's no.
So can we just note provision then after we've done those 7 to put the Littleton Rec Ground in and just...
I'll tell them why actually, because they've just put a cycle path around the perimeter of it with the debris development there, so technically it does have a path down the bottom of it. But it's
Around the outside, yeah.
Okay, well, let's not conflate the issues now, but let's note it as something to discuss when we come to the end, because I still think there's something to be talked about Littleton Rec Ground. Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay?
So the panel's happy with that as it is?
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, thank you. So good little ground.
The next item was the Port Hills Reserve. So the panel asked staff to provide some advice on whether any of those areas could be exempt from the current leashing requirements. So that was from one of the submitters who said they wanted to take the dogs into the Port Hills unleashed. So what we've got there is the current dog control map, and the green areas there are unleashed areas. So that shows you that since 2016, all of those areas have required dogs to be leashed. The major kind of couple of green spaces there that you see that aren't covered by that are not managed by council, they're managed by different land trusts, so the Mount Vernon Farm Park and Linda Woods Reserve, which have their own arrangements.
Can you give us an indication of what the rules are on in those particular pieces?
They are all leashed everywhere. Yep, everywhere in those areas.
So essentially there's no unleashed area in the Port Hills whatsoever?
There are some further around to the south that might be out of that shot, so if there's no colour on it, it's an under effective control area. There is also the dog park up in Elizabeth Park by Victoria. So they're the current requirements. So the reason for each of those individual entries, each of those bits of land are listed as scheduled to the dog control policy, and each of them has a reason for that leash status. They largely fall into 3 categories. They're either about protecting grazing stock, protecting ecological conservation of wildlife values, or they're because of high recreational use or health and safety issues. So high recreation use is like bridle path, walks like that where there are a lot of people. And health and safety is often in relation to cliffside or hillside tracks where there might be a fall risk to have a dog. Health and safety stuff also comes up in the context of mountain bikes, downhill mountain biking, which can obviously be a extreme hazard. And the grazing of stock is really important, which you will have seen in the report for both biodiversity protection, so reducing the habitat for predators, and also for reducing fire risk in the Port Hills. So we're really keen to make sure that land that's leased for grazing in the Port Hills has protection from unleashed dogs. And you will see coverage there.
Yeah, we really wanted to try and make this work, but you've obviously done a lot of work in it, and it's just not practicable. And so you're satisfied that you've given it your best crack. Yeah, just can't do it.
There's been a lot of conversations with staff looking at all of the options and areas in that space, and there's good reason for requiring dogs to be leashed in all of those areas.
Okay, so conversations with staff across the paths team and the policy team and a whole lot, yeah. Thanks. Any questions? Anybody? No? So we're comfortable with where we've landed? You know?
Can I just ask a final question?
Only if it's within scope, Kelly.
Well, I just want to know whether there's been any prosecutions of dog owners who have off-leash dogs on the Port Hills in the last few years.
Prosecutions, no, but a lot of enforcement against dog owners with dogs that are taking stock classification of dogs.
Oh, okay.
That occurs sort of annually.
Right. Any idea of the quantum that you deal with?
We would get 19 sheep and lambs destroyed earlier in the year.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, we're cracking through this. We're on to storm and water basins.
So stormwater basins, the panel asked for advice, and this was linked to the leashing on pathways rule in earlier discussions about whether a general rule could be created to cover stormwater basins. Our advice is that it would be complex to meaningfully draft something that could be easily understood by the public to describe what a stormwater basin is and all its different iterations. We, as you'll know, proposed specific entries for all the current stormwater basins. So they were either prohibiting if there wasn't good recreational access, but there was high wildlife values, or recommending a combined leashed and under control and those rules for those named areas like Te Kuru. So the current ones have all been covered by what's been proposed, but what we want really is for the leash on paths rule to proceed, because that will future-proof and protect those new pieces of land. And it's not just the stormwater basins, it's also other land that the council might acquire, new parks and other things, new drainage reserves and subdivisions. So it would help to future-proof those areas by putting a default rule.
So my query on the stormwater basins then is, am I correct in understanding that it is off-leash and under effective control in mown areas away from paths in the stormwater basins?
Yes.
Okay. So the question is, do you think that it is clear enough then in the policy and the bylaw about that?
Yes, in those individual areas it is set out that that's the case, and then for the general rule in other areas where the default applies, then that would also be clear.
Questions? Hello? Stormwater basin? All good? Okay. Oh, yeah. So it does appear that we're racing through this, but I don't want to give you a false sense of security that we're going to be done and dusted by 2 o'clock, because I still think there's some issues coming up. So we are now on to the Coastal Cliff Reserve, please.
So the panel asked for advice on what the dog control rule should be for this area in Diamond Harbour. We went out with a proposal to require leashing in the reserve, which includes the Coastal Cliff Pathway to protect health and safety, and to prohibit dogs in the foreshore to protect wildlife. There were mixed submissions on this. There was some local support for having some limits on dogs, and there was some local opposition to requiring limits on dogs. But I've also just included the status quo here, so this is what is the current rule in the Coastal Cliff Reserve. So the dogs are currently prohibited in the area, but we also acknowledge that it's not as clear as it could be around what's covered and what the intent was. And so the proposal that we had was to clarify that, so that the leashing was in the reserve, but the prohibited area was on the foreshore.
So if it's currently prohibited around the cliffs, where I'm kind of focusing on.
Yeah, that's the shapes.
If we were to say leash only, and so you could go with your dog on a leash, something happened that involved the dog and the leash, is council then liable for anything? We're putting ourselves at risk by allowing it, or relaxing a rule, if you like.
I'm not sure that it would. It would make it consistent with other leashing. So we've already got that situation out of the district. So I'll be aligning with.
Okay, that's all I wanted to know, because I do support this recommendation. Thanks.
So did you just say that the other cliffside tracks are all leashed?
I wouldn't be confident in making that statement, but I know that we do have other areas that require leashing because they're hillside or cliffside tracks. So in the Port Hills ones that we were talking about earlier.
Tell me, can we distinguish between the reserve and the coastal cliff track? Is it one and the same, or is it clearly a reserve area and a track area on the coastal cliff?
The track goes through
the reserve.
We can get Paul Devlin from Regional Parks to dial in if we need.
The reason that I'm asking the question is, after the last time we met, I went and did that track with my dog because I actually wanted to get a feel for it, and it felt really, it was tricky to say the least. So I'm trying to understand whether there is any possibility in distinguishing between the reserve area and the track area with being prohibited on part of it or on a leash on part of it. I don't know, and I want to talk about that, please, and explore it.
Spoke with Paul this morning, and he said that there's not a lot of land that's accessible other than the track. It's bush-clad, it's gullies, it's cliffside. You've got a cliff at the above you and a cliff below you, a fence below you. So there's not a lot of land that is accessible that isn't the track. So it wouldn't make sense to have a rule for not the track and a rule for the track, because it's
But the track is in the reserve.
the track goes through the reserve.
There's not a lot of reserved land around it. It's essentially the track and a narrow corridor. Do we need to get Paul in on this? I'm really keen to hear from Tyrone on this as the local councillor.
Yeah.
And I know that Aaron's also got some thoughts around this, so I really want to thrash this one out.
Yep.
Over to you,
Should we-
Tyrone. Just get Paul in.
I've just tried to email Tina and he hasn't responded.
You've
Okay.
Teams done.
We'll get started. We'll see where we get to, and if we have to adjourn briefly to get Paul online, we'll do that.
Right, so,
Far away.
I mean, just in terms of the confusion, right, so, yeah, like, there's sort of being acknowledged, yeah, like, there are still, even though the advice we're getting is that the official status is dogs are prohibited along the track, there are signs at the entry points onto the track that say keep dogs on a leash, so it's clearly
Well, it's
ambiguous.
Are they the pest management signs, or are they the council dog control signs?
I can tell you because I took a photo of them when I was there. Yeah, those are them. Yeah.
A bit of evidence.
I got those photos too.
We're looking at lifting the prohibition.
So- Yes, there is confusion. The only conclusion I can draw from that is that is in the Coastal Cliff Reserve, or is that a different part of the Coastal Cliff pathway?
Well, I guess, I mean, the
The
fact
pathway
that
goes through other bits of land. Is the
people aren't making it, I mean, I don't know.
They don't distinguish.
And, you know, it's, yeah.
So the proposal that we've got there
Signage encourages ambiguity and, yeah.
So I guess there's two different things. One is, how can we improve what we're doing now if we're acknowledging that there are things that are out of step or confusing or whatever? And the second part for you is, what do you want to have going forward in that?
So the second thing, so next question, just on the back of Pauline's comments. So if we said, you know, effective control, how does that affect liability?
Tina, that's the photo that I took, and it clearly shows it's a coastal cliff pathway.
That might be before the Coastal Cliff Reserve starts, because you can see there the green goes around further, and it's just the weird blue outline is the part that is legally the Coastal Cliff Reserve. So there's definitely some confusion, thank you. So to move slightly away from the liability question, because I think that's a very tricky one, if it was changed to under effective control, the default leashing on pathways rule that the panel has previously discussed would apply anyway. And the only way around that would be to explicitly exempt it, and I don't know that that would be a good course of action given the cliffside health and safety risks in that area. Wouldn't align with other work that's been done.
But, I mean, it sounds almost crazy to say this, but there really aren't any other places nearby where you can take a dog off a leash.
Some listed in the memo, and the other green spaces there are under effective control areas.
So some of the parks are under effective control?
Yeah, those parks aren't specified, so they're under effective control areas.
So which parks are we're talking about? Stoddart Point Reserve there?
And there's a, excuse me, a number of
Lawrence
other.
Park.
Yeah, Lawrence. The memo, sorry.
So I guess, yeah, the feed, I mean, the parks are often used by sports teams, families, you know, so there's a reluctance, or, you know, there's a sort of a good dog ownership thing about trying not to let dogs off a leash into those spaces where other users are using them, and some of those parks aren't very large, so they're not necessarily good for just dogs just going to do what they need to do, sniffing around, just having a bit of a. Whereas the coastal track, the cliff track, feels kind of ideal in a way, so the dog owners that are comfortable and have the skills to be able to keep their dogs under effective control. Now, of course, just because if we specify under effective control doesn't mean that the dog owner has to take the dog off a leash, because they might
recommend a leash.
We could recommend a leash, yeah, but it really is probably the only decent space where there's kind of just enough area just for a dog to be able to run.
For that to be under effective control, you'd have to explicitly exempt that pathway from the general requirement to leash on paths.
That's what I would propose.
And then you've got to roll into the mixed danger element. So how much would that be either mitigated or increased by the leash or not leash?
I don't think we can.
There's two views on that too, isn't there?
Yeah, and someone with a dog on a leash could be being pulled all over the place by a leash, or someone could trip hazard. Whereas those two things are mitigated by a dog not being on a leash, but of course it's running around a bit more, so it's kind of a bit more of a careering hazard, if you like. But I don't know, it depends how Danny State we want to be about it.
Can I ask what about the users of that track? Do you think it'd be more locals using it? They know their dogs and
Can we have a comment about the submitters? What did the submitters say about this?
There was a split in submissions, so there were definitely local people who emphasised their local access and wanted to take their dogs unleashed into that area. There are also, we're talking small numbers of submissions for these ones. There was also a small number of submissions that said unleashed dogs are dangerous in that area. They didn't want to come across unleashed dogs on the cliffside track. They saw it as a health and safety issue. There's a link to a report there, an incident of a person being injured from falling off the track because of an unleashed dog surprising them on the track. Who
uses the track?
Yeah, I just, my view is I go back to section 10, which is the intent of the Act, the need to minimise danger, and the panel has used the word hazard numerous times in the conversation, and then the need to avoid inherent danger in allowing dogs to have uncontrolled access to public places. I think those are the two issues, and I also appreciate the communities need to have areas where they can access their dogs off leash. I think the cliff track in itself, we had 2 instances where people have fallen off the cliff as a result of dogs being involved in some part.
Leashed or unleashed?
Both were off leash. The one in 2021, the dog rushed up to the gentleman, he fell off. That's the one that Tina made available.
9 months of recovery.
9 months of recovery. And then there was another lady that fell off the track that had to be heli lifted out of there, where a dog rushed up to her. So my view is, by allowing if the panel determines that lifting the leashing requirement, they need to address, in my view, is that minimising danger, and is it avoiding the inherent danger of dogs off leash?
What would be the view on leashed on the path, effective control off the path?
There's no off the path that's accessible. It's geographically, it's bush clad and rocky and cliffy and hilly. It's fairly limited. There's a couple of small areas, but
what is now prohibited to allowing them on a leash, and I think that's very good to take it quietly. And
I'm really keen to hear from Aaron, because it's really quiet down the end, and I want to know what you've got to add to this.
Well, I've walked a few of the cliff tracks around Banks Peninsula, and I certainly can that dogs don't belong there in any form. Just no leash, no free walking. They're a very dangerous environment. The outcome of an incident on one of those tracks can be death. Yes, it can be on a road and it can be in all sorts of places, but it's just, and maybe it's because I'm a bit more scared of heights than most people, but I'm not a complete sod. And I own a dog, and I would not let my son walk, his 17, our dog, around one of those tracks. Whereas if, as a council, if we say it's okay to walk your dog, whichever way, effective control with the lead or whatever, you're kind of saying to people it's okay to walk a dog there, and I personally view that it's not a safe environment. So I sit in the camp that no dogs should go along those tracks, on a lead, off a lead, maybe in a handbag. You got one of those?
Backpack?
Yeah. Doesn't
So-
come out.
So my question to staff then is, if, notwithstanding there's some confusion around this signage, currently prohibited, people are using the track with their dogs, aren't they? On a leash and off a leash.
Got two incidents of dogs rushing up to people, dogs freak out. I've seen people walk freaking pit bulls around these things. And literally my wife would probably jump off the cliff when she saw that dog coming. And the person walking the dog looked way worse than the dog. So.
Lionel,
Yeah.
in terms of a legislative requirement about, what is it, minimising,
They need to minimise dangers.
yeah, I suppose it comes down to whether we're trying to eliminate or mitigate, because the reality is, I mean, people are involved, dogs are involved. We cannot ever eliminate. And I think the issue then comes down for us as governors. Can you put your hand on your heart at the end of the day when someone falls off that cliff because of a dog, that we as a council did everything we possibly could to try and minimise or mitigate? Because that's a question that I'm asking. And the real issue for me is, I think this highlights the intersection and where our responsibilities as councillors collide, because we have a duty to advocate for our local communities, which is what we've clearly got, which Tyrone's doing really well. He's advocating, he's listening to the local community. But at the same time, we have a duty to govern. And the purpose of this hearing is a governance hearing, because this is about policy and bylaws. So for me, with my legal brain, because I really struggled with this, and I was thinking about it when I went out on that path, Tyrone, is it came down to governance for me at the end of the day, with my hand on my heart, to be able to say that as a council and as an organisation, we did everything we could to mitigate the risks. And the governance trumps the advocacy for me. Those are just my thoughts. Keen to hear from you.
I'm just interested, would it be practical, and I can't see it, to make it a one-way track?
No, because it's easy to walk on.
Because there's lots of intersection points you can go on and off.
Some will go here and
It
there.
doesn't have one start and one finish.
It's a multi-use. Yes, yeah.
So dogs
It's not just a
going-
local track, it actually forms part of the intent, so, yeah.
Okay.
So can I ask a question, Victoria? So your view then would be what? Retain the
Leash.
status quo?
No, leash.
You'd be okay with that?
We are aware that people do take their dogs along the track. Some of them are on leash, some of them are off leash. And I think a leashing requirement on general paths, as a general rule, will accommodate both aspects. Whereas now it's a prohibited area where we know people aren't following that.
So we would
Along
be
the track, so leashing would be my preferred option.
And can I just then suggest that we pop in that we recommend short leash here as well?
I'm not convinced yet, because I think it depends on the abilities of the person who's taking the dog and where their comfort levels are around their control of the dog and their own steadiness on their own feet.
Oh,
Because there's some areas where a short leash is actually dangerous, because I struggle to move and it was easier to let the dog off on a longer leash, which gave me a bit more room to manoeuvre myself.
Yeah,
Whereas it wasn't a short leash, so I was going to trip up on it.
right, okay.
Might give you no time to react to if the dog suddenly pulls you off the
That's good to know.
track.
Okay, well, I'll support the leash to rooting then on this. Moving is prohibited.
Yeah, questions off you go, Tom?
So, yeah, so we seem to be sort of going down the pathway.
Because
Brilliant.
The argument is that somehow dog off a leash is more dangerous than dog on a leash. Whereas I don't know if hand on heart we can assure that in this particular terrain. So there's that. Comments on that? Or?
Just the two publicised incidents, both dogs were off leash.
Were there any incidents anywhere else in Christchurch where a dog jumping up on a person caused severe injury over the same time period?
Yeah.
And do you know those locations?
Yeah, one was in New Brighton.
Right. So just one?
Yeah, the
Was
one
only
that
one?
comes, the one that comes to mind.
Right. I mean, do we know how many incidents there are like that every year?
Off the top of my head, we're talking about dogs. I can get back to you.
I guess my question is that we seem to be focusing on the fact that, like, well, this is this terribly dangerous environment. Some people got injured, but is it any more dangerous than any other place anywhere else in Christchurch?
Not in terms of the dog attacks or dog rushings at people.
Yeah, I mean, I got rushed by a dog on a leash on a street in Littleton the other day. It jumped up on me because its owner couldn't control it because it was too big for you.
It happens across the city. I'm not only saying it happens on the cliff track. The environment, what I am considering, the environment of the cliff track adds another complexity and another potential risk. Whereas if you walking down the Esplanade near Brighton and you get right to flat ground, the chances of you falling over.
Yeah, I mean, the only reason I argue, I mean, sure, I absolutely understand the arguments in that, but I guess probably the key difference for me is that there is, and that's probably why I've sort of taken a sort of a different point of view here.
Lauren, can I just go back on that then? You've said there's nowhere else, but I thought you said there was somewhere else.
There are smaller reserves within there.
The feedback I've received is that they're just too small. And of course, there are actually sort of considerations around, you know, it's sort of a bit of an unpopular activity, letting your dog off a leash at some of those smaller neighbourhood parks because people live around them and they're unfenced and there's a main road that runs alongside them, and so there's all these other hazards. You know, a dog could run out onto a road at Lauriston Park and cause a 3-car pileup, you know, just as there's a risk of that as well, right? Like, I reflected to you the other day, Victoria, that I won't say the details, but someone known to me who had a dog off a leash that just about caused a pileup on a state highway. I saw
your brother?
That was my brother. But anyway.
Okay, carry on.
Can we put a note in provision for council to look for a dog park in the area as well?
It could be because the council do own the land up on the hill there. I don't know how suitable it is, but.
You're talking about the Hunters Road thing. So the feedback I've got from staff is that we're not even going to begin looking at that for any other use apart from the proposals that we're currently dealing with. So I can't put a time frame on where the land might be.
Yeah, but we've got the opportunity to make a
That
recommendation.
looks like a massive big change.
One is that Paul's now available online, so we can talk to him to clarify any further points. And the second is if that land isn't specified in any way, then it's an under effective control area anyway without you doing anything. So that could be used for dog exercise.
So your suggestion about looking for a dog park or dog exercise area,
If we just throw that in, you know.
and have another look at it, and it may make it more palatable for some of the local residents.
Yeah.
Aaron?
So just on the panel, how many people own dogs? Right, so you maybe sort of like, right, because just with owning your dog, I'm only call myself a semi-responsible dog owner. We have a fenced yard and stuff, and we only walk it on a lead. It's a sandwich, so they're stupid as and super fun, but they never hurt anyone. But they will do all the other behaviours of a dog. If you own a dog, you can't expect the council to supply you places to take your dog and stuff. If there are dangerous places, the council should highlight that where you shouldn't take your dog, like we do around poisonous lakes and rivers and things, ponds. But it's on the dog owner, and if you move into a neighbourhood with your dog and there's nowhere that you can walk your dog off a lead, then you can only walk your dog on a lead. You chose to live there. There's certain things, you know, you can't own dogs off lead in Manhattan. Just doesn't work. Tokyo, another one, I'm thinking wouldn't work that well. And Littleton. So you just got to, I think, do you know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, I get it. And that was a piece of the puzzle that was missing for me, and actually it brings another issue for me around the onus is on the dog owner, and if they're not confident, then they won't use those paths. And I wonder whether there's an option for additional signage, so if it did become leashed, that actually there was a warning about unsafe. You know, something else that we can add
Danger.
with noting, with a severe danger. And
I just, on that one, I just feel really on the track when there's a dog, because there will be dogs on and off leads, no matter what rules we have. Because the football owner I saw around there, he would not even read a sign. And it's just not an environment that I'm happy for dogs to ever be in. So that's why I'd like to clearly say that they should not be there.
okay, so if I do a temperature gauge, we've got the entire area covered. We've got prohibited, we've got on a leash, and we've got under effective control. So I think we need to acknowledge we're not going to reach agreement on this.
I just need some more clarification. I was just talking about the land, what we call Hunters Road. So you think, Tina, that that would be under effective control, that whole this way?
If it's land that is open to the public and it's not specified in the policy and it's not covered by a general rule, then it's under effective control by default.
I don't know if it's open to the public, is it at the moment, or?
That's probably the question.
I wonder if Paul has any. Paul, do you want to chip in?
You want to tell them what we specifically
I'd like
asking?
to take your microphone.
Okay.
Hello, Paul.
Hey guys, over at Takapaniki at the moment, so I'm multitasking. So,
Okay, did you hear what the question was?
about access into the Hunters Gully area.
Yes, please.
Yeah,
Yeah,
whole
they,
Hunters Road site full.
sorry, are they allowed there?
Yeah.
Can you access it?
I can't remember what the sign is, but there's a walking track there, and I imagine people do take their dogs in there at the moment, on and off leash. There's grazing in the paddocks around it, but they're well fenced. So, yeah, currently people would walk up Hunters Gully and Morgan's Gully with their dogs, I would imagine.
What's the gullies though, Paul? The whole open area.
Well, there's tracks that go across the top to the school, and I would imagine people absolutely walk their dogs through there currently. It's funny land. It's just fee simple land, and you guys will probably know development plan being done for it.
Grazing.
Sorry?
It's not specified.
So can we just move this along?
Yeah, I agree.
Can I just revert back then to Aaron's issue about prohibiting completely, having walked that track with the dog, there are parts of it that I'm completely comfortable with and other areas that I acknowledge are a bit more gnarly. And so I wouldn't want to prohibit entirely, because there's parts of it that are actually very easily walkable and you can go in and out without actually getting into a great deal of danger. So
Can we chop it up?
I wouldn't have thought that was practicable, but what does staff say about that?
Just stepping back a little bit from this, I would say that we're trying where we can to have consistency of dog rules along tracks, and sometimes those tracks go through multiple bits of land, so leashing would make sense through there, and equivalent bits of land, not that there are any particular case, but in other areas for less sort of hairy hillside situations, we already require leashing, so it would be
And you said that you
consistent.
can prohibit part of it.
So am I correct that, can I just do a temperature gauge then? And I'll start by saying I'm happy with the staff recommendation of leashing. Is where I've landed. Where are you landing?
Yeah, no, I'm there too, actually, now.
Alright,
I'd still like under effective control.
Pauline,
Leash.
Aaron.
Prohibited, just dog not on close.
Okay, so that is three of us that would favour the leashing. I expect this will get some airtime when it comes to council. Are you happy to proceed with putting that recommendation in? And I'm going to ask each of you whether you want to vote against, whether you want to abstain, or whether you want to note that you didn't support it.
Yeah, I'll vote against.
Karen?
I'll clearly vote against.
So how do you feel then as a panel that we accept that recommendation on the basis that we've got 3 to 5, which is why we have 5 on our panels and not 4?
Why don't go to council for the ultimate
Yes, it
decision?
will.
Yeah, so, I mean, 3-2 will show them that there's an
was-
issue.
That
here
needs
and
to
we
keep
need to-
Conversation with
Yeah,
much
3-1-1 really, isn't it?
Yeah, there's 3-1-1.
Yeah,
Yeah,
sure.
so that's cool, we should.
So can we record that and just note?
But can I check then whether we can put an extra noting provision in around additional signage for danger cliffs, something like that?
Did Paul, do you not want to talk to that?
But we could do that. It'll be pretty messy and signage. There'll be a lot of signage, but if that's your
Probably,
Okay, do you want to break or do you want to keep moving?
It's really got one to go. Can I just?
There's a bit more after the one as well.
Yeah, well,
Okay, and can I suggest that we do another one after that called signage?
we'll discuss signage when we get to the drafting recommendations.
Yes, thank you.
Because it's a reference in there to that. I think, I acknowledge that Kelly's at the room. I think Bay's around Littleton. Is this where we're at now?
Yes.
Yes.
I'm comfortable with this.
So, do you want to do a quick run over?
Yeah, look, give it a start. I don't think it's contentious and Kelly will catch up in a moment.
Yeah, I don't.
So the panel asked whether their dogs should be allowed greater beach access to beaches around Littleton Harbour. The memo before you sets out what the current rules are. There were some proposed changes as well, which were largely around protecting wildlife. It also noted there are some general rules to require leashing on boat ramps and wharves. We got limited submitted comments on this. They're a bit mixed as well, and our recommendations to keep things as they are.
Cool. Yep. Happy with that?
Yep.
Happy with that? Happy with that. I seem to recall that Kelly indicated he was happy with that before we started the meeting today. So we'll catch him up when he comes in. So that brings the other issue about the Littleton Rec Ground, please. If we can just revisit that now before we go to the noting provisions.
Okay. So the current status of Littleton Recreation Ground is leashed. When we did the review in 2015-16, it was under effective control. There were issues in the community and concerns about people not picking up after their dogs and people not having them under good control when sports were underway. For those reasons, we proposed leashing, and that's been the case since 2016. And then in this review, we've proposed lifting that leashing requirement because feedback is that that's not really working. It's not achieving what people hoped it would.
I can tell you from first-hand experience that it's not made quite a bit of difference to the.
Yeah, so for that reason, the leashing hasn't changed behaviour and
Still take my shovel to football games.
and at the same time, there's also been a call from the Littleton community about having a flat space to exercise dogs. So the proposal was to lift that leashing requirement because it's not working and because people want a flat space to exercise their dogs, so maybe that will work. And also noting that there's a general new requirement to require that dogs are leashed during sports games and practice sessions and within 5 metres of the edge of the active playing area. We got mixed submissions, polar opposites. We got strong opposition from the Whakaropo Football Club saying we're really concerned about this news turf, we don't have to pick a bunch of dogs. This is not good enough, it shouldn't be lifted. The community board also expressed concerns about lifting the leashing rule. On the other side of the submission spectrum, we got community support saying we want that area to be an off-leash place where people can exercise their dogs. There just aren't any other flat places. So they're the two views that we've got. The last time the panel talked about this, staff advice was to treat it the same as any other sports field, which is it is an under effective control area when games aren't being played and leashing when games or practice sessions are underway.
And is that where we landed?
Yes.
Okay, does staff do the panel want to revisit this?
Yeah, just some more extra comments / questions. So the other probably game changer since the thing was changed in 2016. Was it 2016? Was it?
When we did the last review.
Was that the ground itself has undergone a multi-million-dollar refit, which has significantly changed the quality of the service, which kind of leans towards keeping on the leash. The other thing is because it's such a nice space to use, it gets almost constant use. So I guess my question is that, so if we go for under effective control unless there's some sports things happening there. The two 10-year-old kids kicking the ball around on the ground, does that fall into that category?
The wording in the
Bearing in mind there's no other place to go to do that.
Yeah, the wording in the bylaw is more linked to formal game, so it refers to
Practices?
So I'd want to be able to, I guess probably where I'd want to go with that is like, I'm okay with the under effective control thing, but as long as there is absolutely no other activity going on the ground apart from someone else walking about.
So I don't think that the limitation is as broad as
Organised sports, is it?
I'm just trying to check the wording because I can't remember.
Arounds, there's, you know, people running, there's whatever, there's a,
Dogs are present on all sports fields during games and practice sessions.
so a practice session could be.
We would anticipate a team practice session, and so this is the rule that would apply across the district in sports fields. So it's designed that when there's an organised game on, the field's marked out, just stay away with the dogs or have them leashed on this so that they don't interact badly. So there's two different options. One is that a different rule could be put in place for Littleton, or it could align with this general agreed setting for the district and sports fields. So you're wanting it to say something more specific, that when anyone else is there, you've got to leash your dog.
Yeah.
What if it's another dog owner, their dog
Let's see if that's a
unleashed? That's going to be very hard for enforcement because people will come and go during the time that someone's
I
there.
guess it's more about sort of encouraging behaviours, like what can we do in that regard?
So there's already been a lot
So,
of...
you know, in terms of right of way, sports
Yeah.
has got the right of way over dogs,
Yeah.
basically.
partly to
Recreation
children, yeah.
has got the right of way.
Yeah, but you're talking about
During
individuals playing with the
formal
ball.
stuff,
You
yeah.
come into that. That's difficult to
And
describe that on a sign.
Yeah, I know. I guess again, it's special circumstances.
But can I just check in Tyrone, because you, in the same breath, you said that it's so busy because there's no other areas, so there's something on all the time. So if there's something on all the time with someone playing with the ball or doing something in a recreational capacity, then you'll never be able to have your dog.
That was a bit of hyperbole, but
Yeah.
what I'm saying is it does get frequently used. But, you know, I mean, if a dog owner goes down there at 9 o'clock in the morning, it's not, most of the time it's going to be free to use. So it's about having that sort of that social license to do the thing and acknowledging that when people are down there and doing the thing,
So,
please use the leash.
on the other hand, if there's a couple of kids playing with a ball, it's a big space. There's room for a dog to run around as well, surely.
So I guess part of what we might be talking about here is the difference between the regulatory settings and sort of cultural norms and practices. And we can do that softer stuff with communication and signage and working with the community. You can do other things to help get that culture kind of sorted. But the hard regulation needs to be clear and enforceable, and it needs to be practicable. So
Because what I don't want to see is like a bunch of grown adults having a flat out argument down at the park on a Sunday afternoon because 10 of them are having a kickabout and someone wants to let their dog off a leash. And, you know, just
that's part of that balance we get in all public places. I mean, all parks, that sort of thing can happen.
You can regulate against it. How many dog owners have we got in Littleton?
About 2,500 dogs.
in Littleton,
Yeah.
How many people?
3,000.
Out of
It's a lot of
45,000.
dogs.
Lose your voting base.
Oh, yes, yeah, Colin, let's push this through.
Okay, so
It's going to be hilarious.
the question to the panel, please, and I'm going to start at the very end, is do you want to revisit Littleton Rec Ground settings?
No, I mean, so where we're at right now is you know, under effective control when there's no sports stuff going on.
Yes,
effectively. And that's in line with the rest of the city.
Yep, and it's the sports
Yeah.
field rule.
Is there anything we can do around, so what's the current fine for dog fouling?
$300 and it's set in legislation. It's
Is
not
that
up to us.
Right.
Should be. There's noting provision.
But lots of education, lots of good signage, lots of
I think that's a nice segue into our noting provisions.
Yeah.
Because otherwise we're just going to
Yeah.
descend and spiral out of control. But I think we're not going to revisit it. So we have now dealt with the 7 issues.
Yes.
I understand there was one you were going to go away and have a bit of a look at in the break. But before we have this break, we're going to look at the noting provisions, if we can, please. And for anyone who's looking where they are, you will find them as
In the email.
attachment 3 to one of the memos, the smaller memo, and it's called Draft Recommendations for Panel's Report to Council. And it's on the 3rd page where we have optional recommendations for the panel to consider. So I wonder if you want to walk us through those,
Do you
please.
want me to cover the first part of the recs or just broadly?
No, I think we'll do that when we come
Okay.
to the full recs later. I think we're in a consideration and deliberation phase, and so I'd like to encourage conversation around the optional recommendations to see where the panel is sitting on those.
They are the one thing I didn't print out.
Oh, I have to.
So these are a set of draft recommendations that we've put together on your behalf in case you would like to make recommendations to council. So these have come from your previous deliberations meetings when you discussed and raised different issues. And so the first one is about dog registration fees. There's one about signage, one about the online map, one about training, one about online information being sent during the dog registration process, one about developing an online application for the dog limit exemption, which the panel covered last time, and exploring options for rubbish bins and looking at the dog park in the centre of city. And we've got that, and we'll come back with some wording on what you've already indicated for that centre of city situation. So it's really just, is the panel interested in making those recommendations, or they want to tweak them, change them?
Okay,
Yeah,
Pauline,
look good to me. I just want to add one for me.
do you want some time to get ready to add that? Or shall I move on?
Just get through these and
Okay.
at the end.
Aaron, you comfortable with the optional recommendations that were in that document?
Yeah, except what would the registration fee potentially change by? How much?
This wouldn't change it, it's just that staff would look into increasing it.
Okay, so I've
So
got
it's
a
an annual
comment.
plan process.
I've got a comment to make on that because
Oh,
And it will go through that consultation and consideration process at that time.
oh, okay, yeah, that's
Yeah.
fine.
Just correct.
It's not a way to get
can I
people-
add a comment then on that very first one, because I'm mindful that we even asked a number of citizens. People made comments saying I wouldn't mind the fee increasing, but I'm also mindful that others didn't agree with that, and it wasn't actually a specific question that was asked in the consultation. So I'm uncomfortable with the investigate increasing, and I wonder whether we could say that staff review the dog registration fees ahead of the next annual plan process to ensure the budget provision is adequate for animal management services, including compliance, monitoring, education and enforcement. I don't want to write it in a way that has a predetermined bias that it is going to increase. I would prefer that we look at it more holistically to say, what is our current budget provision? Are the fees that we're generating enough for that, and how are we spending that money? That would be my preference, and I wonder what your thoughts were on that, staff and on panel.
Tracy, or
I saw some heads nodding.
Our budget, so that was, we're wanting to have the ability to increase, is that what you're saying?
No, I want staff to review the dog registration fees ahead of the next AP process to ensure the budget provision is adequate for animal management services. And if you determine that it's not adequate, then you put forward a case in the annual plan to increase it. But without establishing that it needs, there's not enough money. I didn't want to predetermine it by saying it's going up.
That's fine, yeah.
Okay, so staff says it's doable. Thoughts, Aaron?
Yeah, totally agreed, but if we, I mean, the other way to get money for this is to have a blitz on dog poo.
Yeah, but then you've got to see it.
Yeah.
It's difficult. But we did have support from a few of the submitters on being happy with the small increase in registration if it was required. So that's, and I think some of that could go to enforcement if that's what you need.
Yeah, well, the enforcement in theory would pay for itself get a really sneaky person that goes to the right places at the right time, they'll catch them out in time.
Well, is that something that they can look at ahead of the next annual plan as well, when they look at what our animal management services are?
Yeah.
And options for, because when they come and bring a paper, they'll be able to say, well, actually, we don't have enough money there. So an elected member doing their job will say, well, what other opportunities have you got to get us some revenue for that? So,
Well, what would work is we say we're doing it, that we're putting in a full-time food catcher, essentially, and but they don't even come out. The story runs, everyone goes, oh no, they're policing it. And so the behaviour will change because everyone will think that the enforcement's actually coming, or we just say in our book that enforcement is ramping up on it. The media will run a story.
okay, so can I suggest, I agree with your sentiment there, that we leave this with staff to look at rewording to try and capture what I was seeking to do and what Aaron's seeking to do in a draft recommendation when we break in a few minutes. Is that right?
Well, I think we could capture it too by just, the panel is asking staff to ensure that there's enough income provided for within the dog registration fee to cover such things as enforcement for whether it's.
Okay, so including the word as enforcement. Yeah, well, let's do that.
We probably want to be a little bit careful not to be too restrictive, and this is a review that the animal management will do every time the animal plan comes up. But we've certainly got a lot of fodder and submissions from people talking about just their thoughts on how things might or should work, and we've also got some limitations in the Dog Control Act around what dog registration fees can appropriately be spent.
Yeah, sure.
So there's just a balance there. So I think short and simple, we're happy to reflect your slight change if that's the direction you wants to go in.
I'll give it to you. Pauline, did you have another one you wanted to raise?
My one actually sits in with the next one. Kelly, did you have a comment?
Yeah, no,
on
I
that?
just want to, so I very, very strongly support much greater enforcement. To me, it's overwhelming in my community, the frustration with dog fouling, and Lionel and his team have done some good work, but they can't be there all the time. And, you know, gauging by the submissions, if we do need to increase the registration, I think that people will understand it, but I just think we should be a real focus on dog fouling because it's just completely unacceptable.
Well, do you want a noting provision to that effect? Are you
Yes,
asking that?
because it is broad, it's not just enforcement, is it, about the fouling?
We should be doing education, we should be doing a whole campaign around it.
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay, so have we captured that in the
Well, that could be-
recommendations, or do we need to tweak it?
That could be captured in D, where you expand on the dog trainers and encouraging training and education.
I just think it needs to be very, very specific and very explicit what we're trying to stop here. I mean,
Part G as well.
I see it every day because I live next to a little wetland reserve, and you know, most people are fine, but it's just ridiculous.
I would support a noting, specific noting provision about that somewhere.
Could we put something in around an education and enforcement campaign?
Well, you've got that in there. Yeah.
Specifically about dog fouling, because it certainly came up as a strong theme in submissions. A lot of people were concerned about it. And
So as part of
it
the,
would be a concert between
Or maybe it's not even just not enforcement and it's broad, so it's just investigate methods or ways or whatever to address, improve.
Crazy thing is Canada geese apparently poo a kilo a day, and you know, doing nothing to get rid of them either.
Yeah, what's worse is we have zero rules in the city around cats, and most dogs don't go into someone else's
Don't start me on
yard,
budgets.
and whereas someone's cat does, and the cats carry that disease that makes your eye melt and all that.
All right, that might be an appropriate time to break, but before we do, Pauline, did you have one you wanted to?
Yeah, just in B, that staff update or install new signage to support the implementation of the replacement policy and bylaw. I'd like to add and look into a branded consistent theme and consider any additional funding required prior to the next LTP. Because if we need extra money, I think we need new signs. With that one I sent to you, I showed you that was sent to me from Queenstown, you know, and it sign like that, had a friendly dog head on the top, this wee paws coming over, and it's sort of like, if we can get a whole new thing like that going around the city, people will look at them. So I'd like staff to have a look and see if that would be a viable thing to invest in.
So just thinking about how many areas we have that we currently regulate, I've lost track of the numbers, but the current policy regulates 155 specified areas. Those specified places often have multiple access points, so they might have a number of different signs.
Yeah.
There's also a sort of stage renewal process that happens with signs where we don't go out and replace every sign at once. We sort of do them over time as they need to be done, and we combine signage with, often in the park there'll be dogs and no smoking and no rubbish, and
those
you know, or at the beach there's swimming danger, there's other messages our council as a whole is trying to communicate to the public. So
there are areas where you could put specific signs though.
Yes, there will be.
What I'm trying to get at is if we could do something that was sort of eye-catching, even launch a design competition, just to raise people's awareness about dogs and have a bit of, you know what I'm saying? But I think it's important. No?
Give the campaign
Well, I
a
think
bit of fight.
consistency, clear signage and consistency of signage.
Well, but let's face it, some of ours are very staid and boring, and
They're not
they're
the
captured,
teeth.
they're captured in within all sorts of other things about that particular reserve or park. But if we could, look, it's just an idea that we worth looking at.
But can that be encapsulated then in the amendment that we put around investigating the budgetary provision? Because it may well be that they look at it and say, well, actually, we've identified that we need to do some work on our signage, and we're going to need more budgetary provision for that. So rather than being too prescriptive, just hear us in terms of what we're thinking about it, and address all of those things ahead of the next.
Or harness
And I
all
mean,
the information.
you'd phase them in.
Leave them in the
In
right
appropriate places, and they're not appropriate to change all the signs that we have.
Don't want to muzzle
And
them.
they don't
like,
We already have 3
but
signs.
it's getting that consistency, so it's kind of like a, oh, that's the dog sign, you know?
To provide full clarity, we don't actually manage the signage.
No.
That sits within the parks team. So I don't want to commit anything to the parks team.
So our noting provision would be a recommendation to the parks team. We have to do that as part of this.
If that's what you want to do.
Okay.
Well, you'll deal with that in debate.
Do you want a recommendation, John, to draft something up for the panel to consider? Or
If
do
the
you want
panel
to
thinks it's worth it,
be covered in the report?
I like where Pauling's going, but it would be quite nice, it could be her board, or I'm happy to pick it up in ours, but one of the community boards could pick it up and with the parks team refund the signs, but pick one of the worst parks or a couple of the worst parks in the ward, go and try the whole lot of stuff there, and then see, hey, we've had a real change of behaviour by doing this at these parks. So, I mean, either one of our boards, we've got lots of posh people that love dogs.
well, how about we just put a notion
Posh dogs
provision
don't poo, is
to
the sign that we've
the parks team that the panel would like to look at more effective signage and an opportunity that could be trialled through a community board or something like that. Can you cobble something up like that?
Leave out opportunities for a pilot program.
Yeah.
Because even the park staff might come and go, oh shit, we've got a real problem with this park here. So that'd be the one that would really put the energy into it, see if we can change the behaviour of one particular
Because
sign.
after all, this whole thing and this whole bylaw and all these policies does come down to human behaviour. We can't enforce all of it. We're really wanting people to take responsibility for their dogs.
And bring a dog, but not its own.
No, never say negative.
Okay, governance staff, you suggested that we might like to take a proposed afternoon tea at 2:45, and our timekeeping is so good that we're going to stop now at 2:41 for a little break. How much time would you like?
Probably about half an hour.
Yeah, we've got a couple of things to draft up.
How long? Half an hour, and then we can close it all off today. I'd rather do that. How do you feel about that? You all right? Does anyone need to be anywhere quickly? No, good? Okay. Done. See you shortly. And of course, if we can get it done earlier than half an hour, we won't be far away.
That work?
Okay, so we're ready to come back.
Yes, I think we are, aren't we?
So, thank you. We are coming back. So we're now up to the formal part where we're going to be finalising the recommendations to council. But before we do that, I just want to check on then two things. One is a procedural. and the other is the wording that you have worked on in the adjournment. So from a procedural perspective, when we finish today, do we need to adjourn in case there's anything outstanding, or do we conclude the hearing and wait for the report to come to us? And when the report comes to us, do we sign it off? What do we do with it? Can you just outline those steps for me, please?
So what would happen is, so finalise the recommendations today, close the meeting, then a report would be drafted and it would come to you to sort of approve.
As chair?
As the chair, yeah, and it would also just run it by the other panellists to make sure they're happy with it. Then when it would go to council, I understand now that changes, slight tweaks can be made to recommendations in council.
So my query is, do we need to record today that there's any delegations to sign it off, or so does it just come to me to seek approval of the panel before it's formalised as going into a meeting agenda for council? Are you all happy with that? So that when it comes in, figure out some goes, we'll make sure we've got it covered off.
Sure.
Okay, and in the unfortunate event that we look at the report and go, oh, we didn't get that right, what happens?
I'd say that we'll deal with that when it arises, the expectation that that sort of is aligned.
Look at the worst. So can you?
I feel like as long as you're happy with the recommendations we've got here, then I can't imagine that report straying.
Yeah, I agree.
Thank
Thank you.
From there.
That's not what I need to hear.
Yeah.
So, do we now take these recommendations from the top and you highlight what's changed and what you've worked on in the break? Or do you want to do the changes first and then do all of these in one go? What's the easiest way to do it? Start.
I can just run through the quick list of the 6 things that you asked us to look at, and then we can show you how we've implemented those. So there was a change in addition to the Central City noting recommendation around dog park or dog exercise area or fenced area for dogs. So we'll take you through that. A change to the Otakura Avon River corridor around formal roads. So we've got some wording on a different screen that we'll show you. We had a noting recommendation about investigating a dog exercise area in Diamond Harbour. We had the change that you provided around the funding and dog registration fees to implement the bylaw. We had something around improving and addressing dog fouling, and something around innovative approaches to signage and other communications things. So that's what we've been working on the break. And there's some highlights up here on screen for you to see. So that first one, it's a replacement, B is a replacement of A. So that's the...
Okay, the staff review, animal management services to ensure alignment with the vice president bias dog registration adequate responsibility. Yeah.
Give the broad.
Yeah, you happy with that?
Yeah, lovely.
Right. Yep.
So we're happy for that one at the top to go.
And then the second one there is the one around innovative approaches to communications, including signage.
That was the one you mentioned, Pauline. That one there, C.
Yeah.
Well, can they be combined?
One is the sort of standard signs that we will do anyway, that are regulatory signs, and then the newer approaches around innovative
The communications
things that we might do.
You know, it's innovative.
Well, it's different than what we usually do.
Even though it's worse.
Well,
change. It would be looking at ways to appeal to dog owners and implement the changes.
I would hope it would be.
I think we'd come back to council with that, wouldn't we, and show you what we've come up with. And
so do we need to say something on there that why we put that in there? Staff investigate innovative communications.
We can include
policy and bylaw recognising.
We can include some coverage of it in the report.
I'm okay with that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Because if you look at it standalone, you go, what?
Yeah, so we'll link it
Around,
there.
education and behaviour change.
Yes. But can we put education behaviour change in there?
to support,
Yeah.
to support.
Got a really good program, but we didn't use any new innovations to do it. Go away and innovate.
We could change communications with behaviour change.
This way, yeah.
Would that work?
No, stuff like implementing an innovative, no.
No, it's more to support behaviour change and
Okay.
the rationale why. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah, it is.
Education and behaviour change.
Get rid of.
Yeah. Behaviour change of dog owners. Or just
The dog owners, their supports.
I think that's fine.
take it out, let's have a look. Does it cover it enough, loose enough?
Think so?
But you talk to it when someone says, what's that? Okay.
Well, is it referring to all dog owners?
Well, we've talked about it as a pilot, so you were suggesting a limited area that it might apply in, just to try and see if it changes things.
Behaviour change of dog owners as required.
We'll put some framing. We'll put some framing in the
Do you want to
report.
put education in there?
So behaviour change and education.
Because, I mean, some signs might have
Yeah.
the why in there, which often helps people. Why do you interest?
Yep. Responsible dog owners. Oh no, we don't want to educate the responsible dog owners because we're already educated. That's fine.
What is for work there for there?
Yep. Are we all on board? Okay. Tina, where are we at to next?
I'll just scroll down, I think. So the two new ones.
Investigate options for a dog exercise area in Diamond Harbour.
Yes, please.
Oh, and we'd added this on to for those interested.
Oh, yes.
Investigate options for a dog park, dog exercise area or other fenced area where dogs can be exercised off leash, simplicity to encourage. I like it. Very good wording. That's a nice collaborative approach. Done?
Could Jay say that staff investigates? Sorry, that's just very particular about grammar. Staff is not
Well, we've got investigate and then two after that.
So,
Yeah, investigate.
No, that should say investigates.
staff investigate.
Staff is a single entity.
Well, we can double check with the proper grammar.
The grammar queen.
You're getting down into the weeds.
Is there anything below that? That's the end?
No.
Okay, so
We're getting into
The
upland
only-
grass.
Sorry.
the only other thing that we have is the other window.
Sorry, what one?
Oh, right, placement.
Did you see the last
See
time?
that dog felling one, Kay?
Yes.
So much of what we were doing around innovative ways of educating. Oh, okay. Yeah, okay.
It might be better if
I
that.
mean, K is probably going to feed, or the other way around, feed into K.
I mean, there's lots of new things that we might want to talk to dog owners around. There's the new leashing on pathways rule. There might be.
The other ones are communications plan.
We thought it was important to call that out because there was a common sort of theme that came through. People concerned
Yes,
about.
dog felling was a big one.
Yeah.
Yep. Perfect, thank you.
Okay, and then the other window.
That's a temporary sign.
From Queenstown.
Brilliant.
We dog.
Oh,
Okay,
it seemed dog friendly.
So
Sorry, I just have to share that.
Okay, that's good to say. Please keep your masters on a leash.
So the panel was wanting some changes to the Otakaro Avon River Corridor policy entry to, we're going to make one change to that, which was on former roads, closed to traffic.
That's
So
right.
in that underline there.
close to vehicles?
Motor vehicles, yeah.
Close to motor vehicles.
To motor vehicles.
I think what that was there.
We've got close to motor vehicles down the bottom, so we could just say on former roads.
I feel like we edited one in the recommendations just before.
Oh, we did.
We did, yeah.
Sorry, it's in the other section. So that's the policy wording, and then we'll go back to the recommendations to check that
There
it
we go.
reflects it.
Other than former roads, on paths except former roads? Other than?
Where are you? Which
Third bullet point?
must be leashed on paths. Well, whether former roads are perceived of as a subset of paths. Just clarifying that they must be leashed on paths and the not leashing is only on former roads.
You're talking about rather than except and other than, are you?
It's the other than I don't like.
We could just get rid of other than former roads
Yeah. Yes.
and just clarify that. I mean, that's
Do
a
you
general
know what a road
anyway,
is?
but
Do you
sometimes
know what a
it's quite
former road is,
helpful.
or are you saying that it's not clear? It's clear as daylight. You know it was an old road. Closed to motor vehicles, nice. And that's clarification about former roads and access to the river. Right, can you go back to the other screen now?
Because that's the intent of what the panel is recommending, and then we need to check that the wording
Is aligned.
is appropriate and will achieve that. So you could get rid of, you want to delete other than on former roads?
Yeah, I do. And Lionel, you agree with that? Panel?
So just that dot point below that, no, leave that one, no.
This one?
Yeah, just delete the.
Just
other-
clarifying.
No, delete only to paths from other than former roads, delete. Sorry.
Because that's the general rule.
It is the general rule, sometimes it's helpful in those individual entries to just clarify, and particularly because we've covered lifting, leashing on roads, it might be helpful to just be clear that we are requiring leashing on paths.
Yes, got it. I'm okay with that. Yep. Aaron, Pauline? Okay. Okay, Tina, what do we do now? Do we move the recommendations as, or no?
Because you're not agreeing to them, they're just your draft that will be in your report to council for them to agree to. So procedurally, do they agree to the draft recommendations?
Yeah, and they do need to be moved and seconded.
So did we clarify all the noting provisions that we were doing? We've sorted that?
Yes.
Okay, so this is about finalising the recommendations to council as we have just seen on the screen, which reflects what was in the draft that we've had, and it's been updated as per our conversations today. And these are recommendations to council. They are not decisions by us. Decision making is with the panel. So can I have a mover and a seconder for that? For those recommendations. Pauline, I want to second it.
Yeah.
Oh, there we are, Pauline and Kelly, moving and seconding that. Do we have any questions on what we've just done now and earlier today? And then we're going to close with a couple of words, a bit of debate each to close off. No questions?
Just in terms of, so where did we end up with like noting things?
About your opposition to?
No, just like, say for example, like I wanted to make a comment around the Littleton Red Ground that, you know, why, you know, noting that that it's in a town where there's very little spare space and we need to improve education and, you know, really look after the sports teams and all that sort of stuff. Yeah.
And we're going to put that in the report, weren't we? Cover that up in the report.
No, because noting there was quite strong opposition from the sports team, so we have to have our rationale very clear as to say, look, you know, we're addressing your concerns. You know, that dog fouling exists regardless of.
So are you asking for a hybrid which has a noting provision in the recommendations as well as a further explanation in the staff report, in the panel report?
On that, really.
In the panel report, or are you asking for just to be explained in the panel's report, but not specified as a recommendation?
Look, I mean, if it's explained in the panel's report.
Yeah, I think we can
actually work through that problem.
Yeah, we can pick up on that and put a summary in. The panel spent some time on
And we're all clear then that what happens next is that staff will be working on our report. It will come to me and be circulated and discussed with all of you to make sure that we're comfortable with it. And when we're ready to sign it off, it can then be put on the agenda for a council meeting, which is likely to be late August or September, but before October. Does that make sense? Because it's in this term. So we're all comfortable with that?
Yep.
So before we close the meeting, does anyone want to add any final comments before we close off? I'll just start at the end with you, Aaron, and we'll work down the table.
Oh, no, other than thank you to all the staff for work you've done and the answers and going back around in circles multiple times. The chasing your tail. So yeah, thanks for that. I like everything except for the walking dogs on cliffs. I'm not really in favour of that one, and I think that will be a stickler at the council meeting as well. So just pre-warning you, and I think there'll be a lot of public that'll probably voice opinions after that comes out as well.
Pauline, so, yep, also big thanks to everybody for the piece of work and complex, particularly with the 45,000 dogs that we have in the city, and they'll be growing with our population and growing in numbers with our population. So we really do need good guidance for people to know how to behave with their dogs. So this is why I think education is really important in embracing that signage opportunity. Now that won't happen overnight, but if we can just start looking at what we can do there. I've just sent you the picture of the one from Queenstown, which is quite cool because it actually takes your attention, and you can look at using those for education to create behaviour change and explaining to people the why as well. So for instance, why do you need to have your dog on a lead, or don't take your dog to certain areas? Because we've got to protect the wildlife and the habitat in our environment, which we are working as this council so hard to protect and restore and rebuild. So I think if people know the why, they're more likely to become responsible dog owners. And so this word balance has been tossed around a bit today, and it's a balance between allowing the dogs as much freedom as we can to run and round and for their owners to let them off the lead, but also protecting our wildlife and protecting other people and other dogs. So I think this has really struck the balance quite well. We've made quite a lot of changes since we began, and I thank the staff for all the work, and all the wordsmithing as well has been brilliant. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I also would like to extend my thanks to staff. It's been a really good process. We've received really, really good advice. Also to you, Victoria, you did this processing very good. Speaking of my colleagues.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, really well led, and I think you'd make an excellent mayor if you decided to go. That's by the by. Now there's never been a better time to be a dog, really, has there? Like they're better fed, they work less, they're got better lives in general than they ever had. I can't move in my local pub for dogs hanging out and taking the seats. I even saw a TV program where one was driving a car and talking to a baby, but that was maybe another thing. But anyway, so I think the thing that we're trying to do here is to make life as good as we can for dogs and the communities in which they inhabit, and I think that we've done the best that we can here, based on the advice and the good constructive deliberations that we've had. I mean, I've got a couple of concerns just around. One of my colleagues said that it's not council's role to provide dog walking areas or whatever for people. I'd argue that it's fundamentally what council does, is to provide facilities for people living in cities to be able to make their lives better and for them to be able to get more enjoyment out of the way that they use the city that we govern. And in some of the places that people live, there aren't always necessarily the right conditions to be able to provide all the things that people need, and we sort of have to come up with innovative solutions around that. But apart from that, look, again, we're not going to get everything right, but I think we've got most things right, and I'm really happy with where we've landed.
Yeah, good. Most of it's all been said. Won't stop me from rehashing it all. Yeah, I think first thing we should note is that most dog owners are pretty sensible and responsible and responsive to what we ask them. And I think we're going to be providing some really good guidance for the owners. There's a few things that bother me. Fouling is a real concern, and I think we need to do more work in this space. This is not perfect. It's not going to please anybody, but I think everybody. But we did take a sensible approach, and we read about and heard from an awful lot of people through the submissions. But we need to think about all the people of this city in regards to dogs, and I think we've struck quite a good balance here. There's been some great questions, some excellent discussion, and excellent work by staff. And panel members have all been pretty open-minded and constructive and positive about this, so I think that's been really good. Vic's chaired it really well. I really appreciate having Lionel here. Lionel's on the ground sort of experience. He kind of fills me in on different issues that he deals with, which is actually really useful to know. And I think John, you've done a good job of sort of presenting up this whole thing. So thank you, Tina. That's long. Andrew for being here.
Mother and father?
I think that's been.
Thank you. I think it has all been.
Academy.
I think it has all been said, but we're making good time, so that won't stop me from just adding a couple of closing comments. There is an enormous amount of work, so thank you to the staff who have ably and very expertly walked us through this very patiently. It has taken longer than we thought. I acknowledge it's had a high public interest, and huge thanks to the submitters, all 1,560 something of them, and the 51 who took the time to come in and speak to us. It's really important that people do come and talk to us, because you get much more better feel of what their perspective and their issues are. So thanks to the 51 who turned up in person. We've mentioned the challenge of the balancing act, really competing priorities around protecting the public and the recreational needs of dogs and their owners, and I'm satisfied that we have thoroughly analysed those options. We've looked at everything from every which angle, and most importantly, with the assistance of staff, we've kept a really keen eye on any unintended consequences of loose drafting. So I really do appreciate that, where it's been a bit painful for you, but we've certainly appreciated it. We couldn't always see the bigger picture, but you were able to connect the dots for us, and that was really helpful. And that's why I think we got through some of those 7 today so easily, dare I say it, because of the work that went into leading us to our answer. That was an expert piece of report writing, thanks. We have listened to submitters, I've got no doubt about that. And for those of us who constantly hear from people, you never listen to your submitters, we did. We've made changes, and we've made changes where we can. And I think it's important to notice that where we can, because there were some other areas where we wanted to, but on advice from staff, we just simply can't do that. It's just not going to work. So I'd like to acknowledge that we have made those changes where we've been able. And we have also helpfully made some noting provisions. And I think what the noting provisions does is that it helps it to land better with our community, so that we can sort of talk them through it. It lands better with the public. So that's been really helpful as well. So I'm comfortable with where we have landed as a panel. The hardest thing part for me really was the coastal cliff. And others have acknowledged that, and I've got respect for Councillor Fields, who has been advocating for his community on 2 of the really tricky bits around the coastal cliff, but also on the lift and rec ground. And that's important. And what it does, as I said with the coastal cliff earlier in our consideration deliberation, it highlights the conflict that we have as councillors when we are required to advocate, but at the same time we're also required to govern. And this is a policy review and a bylaw review, and those are tasks of governance. So when I came to me weighing those up on the coastal cliff, I am comfortable that governance trumps the education of the locals on this particular occasion. And I also acknowledge, with assistance from staff, that these tracks aren't used just by locals, they're used by a number of people across our city and district, and also their visitors. So just before we finish, thank you to my fellow panel members. It's good to do that, it's been a pleasure, and I'm really pleased to conclude this. So before we close off, we've had it moved, we've had it seconded. All those in favour of the recommendations that we've approved to go to council, say aye. 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 Thank you. That's finished. So we will The hearing is concluded.